and welcome to hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health. It's a series that's been put together in conjunction between the Mail and Guardian as well as the kind folks at Cipla. Today, we will be talking to Dr. Frans Korb. He's a psychiatrist and is the board chairperson of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. You'll know them as SADAG. Now, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown have not only taken its toll on our physical health and the economy, it's also put a massive strain on our mental health and wellness. So in this regard, like I said, the M&G in partnership with Cipla have launched hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health. It's a campaign with a series of interviews with mental health experts, one of them being Dr. Korb. Dr. Korb, thank you so much for joining us on this. Now, mental health has its various causes, it has its risk factors, it's got symptoms and it's got treatments. But it's been reported in the last year that calls to the SADAG hotline had doubled on a daily basis. We're looking at 1,400 calls on average to that very important hotline. And that's since the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown started, our lives being turned upside down. And now with all this talk about the long-term physical impact of COVID, do we even comprehend the extent of the wave of mental health issues that are going to be coming at us for some time as a result of this pandemic?
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much for inviting me to give this short overview of what has been happening since COVID. You're so right when you said that, what happened in the beginning is that there was this big focus on all the physical problems. Everybody was talking about getting sick, how sick they will get, going to hospital, being on ventilators. And it was really the whole mental health issue part of the COVID pandemic was totally neglected in the beginning. But I think now that we, more than just over a year into the pandemic, we now realize this whole mental issues that are the consequences of the pandemic. And you rightly said that, when we used to have between 400 and 600 calls a day on the helpline at SADAG, and that is since the COVID pandemic, that has doubled. We are now getting on average 1,400 calls a day. And I think that is just one of the kind of barometers, indicators, red flags, how this pandemic has actually been affecting the population.
Now, obviously, it's good news that the people feel like they can reach out to an organization like a SADAG. That definitely is good news. But what are some of the disorders that you are seeing already coming through as a result of this pandemic?
I think that the first thing we need to stress is that of stress. And I think, as the pandemic started, that first part of the pandemic when we were in that severe lockdown, that level 5 lockdown, and we were all basically in quarantine and we weren't allowed to leave our homes, that in itself already had kind of its consequences of being locked down and not having interpersonal contact with people, not being able to go out, not being able to see family and friends. So that has got consequences of isolation already psychologically. After that, I think we went into this whole period of stress, where people were fear of losing their jobs. People were losing their jobs. Places like restaurants and theaters and things were closing down. People didn't have jobs anymore. So then this whole thing of stress started. And it's also the whole change of how we live. Now all of a sudden, children are at home the whole day. They're not going to school. Parents have to cope with children at home. Parents have to do teaching. Parents have to, get their children organized. So everything in society changed, and that actually resulted into severe stress. And stress is one of the main, it's a very general term, stress is not a diagnosis. But stress, people that are constantly under severe stress, of course, then develop all the other psychiatric disorders. And the main ones we see, obviously, depression is the main one that started rearing its head and it's becoming more and more prevalent as depression. And then secondly, all the stress, the anxiety disorders. And even from that, including in anxiety disorders, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder. So all the anxiety disorders. And another thing I see often in the practice is what contributes to the stress is kind of the kind of insecurity, the kind of, if I do get COVID, how's it going to affect me? Because I think that is the kind of, we don't know. Will I be one of the people that will just have a few symptoms and I get over it? Or will I be one of the people that will land up in hospital? If I do land up in hospital on a ventilator, if I get out of there, will I be totally back to normal? You know, that's all those kind of questions we can't really answer, that has been placing, that is unique to the COVID pandemic that we see. But definitely depression was definitely on the increase. All the anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety, panic attacks, post-traumatic stress, insomnia, all those things were the ones that were primarily affected, and we see much more in our practices. And you know, everywhere we go, everywhere I speak to my colleagues, not only psychiatrists, I'm a psychiatrist, but even psychologists, everybody says that they are just totally overburdened and busy. They just cannot cope with the burden. All of us are working longer hours, hospitals are full. So it's really psychologically, mental health, it's really taking its toll.
Is it also fair to say that we're dealing with a generation who know that they can go and speak to somebody? Because obviously a lot of us come from communities where it wasn't the done thing to go and speak to a stranger about your personal problems. You know, the older generation would say, oh, no, you're not going to go and talk to a stranger about how you're feeling. You just need to shake it off and get on with your day to day. Are we finally now dealing with a generation of people who know that they need to seek help from an expert?
You know, Michelle, it's so difficult to answer, but you know, I've been in practice 30 years, and I mean, in these 30 years, unfortunately, the stigma is still there, and I think it has become easier. Perhaps it has become easier to go and talk to your doctor, or go and talk to your psychologist, or go and speak to a psychiatrist. But unfortunately, the stigma is still there. Just an example, I think you might be aware of it, that just 1 week ago, last week, that a lady who suffers from schizophrenia in Soweto was actually killed, was murdered, because they thought she was strange, she was out of the ordinary, and the community actually killed her because of her weirdness. But
it turned out that it was dementia.
Well, yeah, this lady had schizophrenia. I mean, so there is still this kind of stigma, misunderstanding about what mental illness is all about. And you know, I think from our side, from a medical side, we have come a long way in understanding the medical aspects, that we understand that the medical aspects, there's lots of medications on the market now that we can help people to treat all the mental disorders better. So really the help is there, but there's unfortunately still a stigma that we need to deal with in society.
Let's talk very quickly about the knock-on effect of COVID-19. You've spoken about the disorders that you're seeing coming through as a result of the pandemic, but that's also had a knock-on effect to those who have been diagnosed with disorders before COVID-19 ever reared its head.
You know, that is, if I think about my practice as well, we can roughly divide it into 3 groups. First of all, you get the existing patients, you know, that already had a depression or had anxiety disorders before the pandemic. And lots of those are coming out now because of the severe stress of the pandemic. They've started relapsing on the one hand. And I think another kind of worrying things that we did see in the beginning as well is that people stopped taking their medicines, which was a weird thing, which was difficult to understand why people would now all of a sudden stop taking their medicines. But that's the first group, are the people with the existing diseases. The second group are those that the new patients, because of the severity of the stress of the pandemic, now developed panic attacks and anxiety and depression. So that's the second group. But we must never forget the third group, and those are the caregivers. You know, there are lots of caregivers that look after people with mental illness, look after people with severe mental illness. And the caregivers have also been going through an amount of stress. So we see lots of caregivers also, that third group of people that have also been really going down and has been suffering. So those are roughly the 3 groups that we see of in our practices that has been affected.
We hear over and over that it's important to find balance in our lives. And when you talk about that, you talk about proper nutrition, exercise, doing something to alleviate your stress and all of that. But what about brain balance? What about the health of our minds? How do we even start to achieve that from a medical point of view?
Yeah. You know, for the first thing I need to say is, please, everybody must remember that brain is part of the body. Brain is another organ in the body. So really, the physical things we must always remember. So living healthy. And what that means, the same medical principles apply, that, you know, stay away, don't abuse substances, get regular exercise, relax, do relaxation exercises. These days with the internet, you know, we don't have to go and see a psychologist necessarily to get to learn how to meditate or how to do mindfulness. You can now Google it. You can now go onto YouTube, and there will be thousands of videos to show you how to do this. So learn to relax, get away from substances, do exercise, don't smoke, or if you do smoke less, or the government will tell you to stop smoking. Or alcohol, you know, the normal physical. If you are overweight, lose weight. So from a physical point of view, same principles apply for brain health. But then more on the psychological side of brain health, relaxation, you know, mindfulness, awareness. That is really what we're talking about, is awareness of yourself, your feelings, your emotions, your situation. Awareness, I think, is very important. And then I think the main thing that I always tell my patients is to, when you become depressed or very anxious or something, the worst thing you can do is withdraw. The worst thing is going home, locking yourself in your room and not doing anything. So what we always tell people, maintain contact. Make sure you speak to your friends and your family. Make sure you've got friends. Make sure you go out, even if it's just for coffee. So maintain contact with people. Develop or renew hobbies and interests. There is just so much one can do these days. You know, develop interests, those kind of things. Hobbies, to get involved. And perhaps lastly, start setting goals. Think about your life. Start setting goals. Start thinking positively. Think positive affirmations. You know, these are the kind of things in any case that psychologists will teach people when they go and see a psychologist. But, you know, like I say, it's so easy these days to get it on the internet and do it. So I think the main thing I want to almost preach is remain part of life. Don't opt out of life. I know it's difficult. It's easier said than done. But it goes a long way towards brain mental health if you do the physical part as well as the psychological part, just to stay in life. And perhaps the last thing I have to say here is there's always help. People always say, and that is one of the comments I always get, is that, you know, perhaps after a suicide attempt or that kind of thing, I didn't know where to go to. I don't know who to contact. I don't know who to speak to. I think the other thing we need to remember, there is always help. And I think every home should really, on their fridge, have a little sticker of the SADC helpline, of your GP's helpline, whatever it is. You know, please know that there's always some way to go for help.
Now, you've given some great tips that people can just start helping themselves. But like you said, sometimes you do need to take it further and speak to somebody who's better qualified to help you. But in South Africa, we're sitting with a situation where there aren't enough to go around. I mean, let me just get these figures right. According to figures released by SADC, only 1 in 10 South Africans have accessed mental health treatment or care. 1 in 3 South Africans will or do have a mental health issue at some point in their lifetime. But there are 0.31 psychiatrists per 100,000 South Africans. So a 0.3 of you per 100,000 South Africans. I mean, it's just dire. And I think even more so at community grassroots level, the need is even more so. How bad is the situation at that level? And how can ordinary community members, what can they do to help each other until such time they can get to see an expert such as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the facts are there. I think we've always, been arguing, fighting about this whole thing that we need more mental health care workers, and that includes psychiatrists and psychologists. I think the psychiatry fraternity is very dire because we are really less than 1 person per 100,000. So there is really an absolute shortage of psychiatrists. But you know, like I said, they're not the only people that can help. GPs can help. A GP should also have the basic knowledge of mental health. They've been trained in basics of mental health as well as medication. So GPs can help. So there is really the shortage. How we must address it, it's very, very difficult. And the fact that we need to highlight is obviously most of us are concentrated in the main cities and the main areas. And the rural areas are really very, very sparse in terms of mental health. The other thing I also just want to highlight here is that, you know, it's still that kind of thing is when we look at, for instance, the mental health budget from a government or a provincial point of view, that the budget, the money allocated to mental health is like, I think the last saw 5% or 7% of the total health budget, where psychiatric diseases make up to 20% of what we see in the clinics. So, you know, if one just takes the mental health diseases that we see, we should really give, mental health should really get 20% of the health budget. So I think, and it's unfortunately still that thing is when it comes to the point of handing out money, that psychiatry and psychology, mental health is always last in the queue. Or if anything needs to cut, let's cut the mental health budget. I think you know, you asked the last part of your question is, what about the rural areas? I think the main thing we need to do is psychoeducation. What happened in Soweto last week, I think it's a lack of knowledge, it's psychoeducation. We need to educate, continue educating, and I think that is a part that SADC does as well, part of their mission to really educate as far as possible. What is mental illness? This is not something that is from the devil or the spirits or whatever. This is a medical disease, and there's help. People can't help where they are that way. So I think psychoeducation is one of the main issues, including education in the rural areas, where we need to do the education to help people.
And that's why conversations like these are so important. And let's hope if just one person was able to watch us today and has been able to seek help as a result of it, then we've really done a good thing. Thank you so much. This is Dr. Frans Korb. He's a psychiatrist. He's the board chairperson of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and he's a guest here on the hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health series, brought to you by the M&G in partnership with Cipla. Now remember, SADC is Cipla's mental health partner. Whether you're helping someone or you need to find help yourself, you can always call the Cipla SADC 24-hour free counseling helpline, like we've spoken about earlier. That number is 0800 456 789, 0800 456 789. So thank you for watching the Cipla hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health series. Do share this video, help a friend or a loved one, and please do look out for our next session. So do stay safe, and let's make mental health our top priority.
Thank you.